Okay, let's go ahead and go through the final parts of question 1 for the Module 1 homework that involve contingent consideration. Again, we have the same scenario as before, where big companies acquiring little company. This time they're paying $600,000 in cash and giving either additional cash or shares of stock if certain sales growth targets are met over the next 3 years. Let's go ahead and start with the case of the cash consideration. So basically what we have is we have some subjective probabilities that we've estimated that these various earnings targets will be met. So for example, we think that there's a 20% chance that sales growth will be less than 2%, and if that's the case, there will be a 0 additional cash payment. We think there's a 30% chance that sales growth will be between 2 and 4%, and if that's the case, there will be a $20,000 additional cash payment, and so on down the line. Now, we need to find out what's the expected value of this additional cash payment. And what we'll do is we'll multiply each potential payout by the probability of that payout occurring. So 20% times 0, 30% times 20,000, 30% times 50,000, and so on. We sum those up and get a total expected value of $39,000. And so that's the expected value of this promised additional payment. Now, that $39,000 is guaranteed to be incorrect. There's no way we're going to pay $39,000. We'll either pay 0, or we'll pay 20,000, or we'll pay 50,000, or we'll pay 70,000, or we'll pay 150,000, but we will not pay $39,000. So our first step is to figure out, again, what's the goodwill or bargain purchase in this? The total consideration that we're giving up is $600,000 in cash plus a future contingent payment with an estimated value of $39,000 for a total expected payout of $639,000. The fair value of the assets is $570,000 again for goodwill of $69,000. So we'll record the acquisition, and just to make life easier, let's go ahead and instead of recording all the individual assets and liabilities, let's just record the net assets of $570,000 plus $69,000 in goodwill plus our two forms of payment. We pay out $600,000 now, and we have a contingent liability for $39,000. 3 years later, we find that actual sales growth was 5%. That falls within that middle band. So we're going to pay out $50,000. So we write a check for $50,000. That pays off that contingent payment liability, and the extra $11,000 is a loss. Now, just as an aside, this contingent payment liability is a long-term liability. Therefore, it should be recorded at present value. So if this was really being done carefully, we would record the contingent payment liability at $39,000 at its present value, and then we would accrue interest on it each year as we got closer to the expected payment date. Okay, let's go ahead and go on to case D now, where it's the same scenario, but now we're going to give shares of big company stock. We're going to follow the same basic procedure. First, we have to figure out what's the expected number of shares. And so again, for each possible outcome, we multiply the number of shares that would be issued times the probability of that occurring. So a 20% chance of 0 shares for an expected value of 0, a 30% chance of 500 shares for an expected value of 150 shares, and so on down the line. We add it up and get 1,010 shares, and at $40 a piece, those will be valued at $40,400. So, what's the total consideration that we're surrendering? We're giving up $600,000 in cash, plus an expected additional share issuance worth $40,400 for a total value of $640,400. The assets have a fair value of $570,000, generating goodwill of $70,400. Again, it's worth noting that the expected number of shares of 1,010 is not going to be the number of shares we issue. The possible outcomes are 0, 500, 1,200, 2,000, or 4,000 shares. The 1,010 shares is nothing more than the statistical expected value. So we go ahead and record the issuance. We go ahead and debit net assets for $570,000. Now, again, I can't stress enough, I'm debiting net assets there simply because we don't have, I'm trying to make this a little less cluttered. If we had the individual assets available, it would be ideal to list the individual assets and liabilities, but rather than doing that in every single example, it does streamline things a great deal to simply debit net assets. So we debit net assets for $570,000. We record the goodwill of $70,400. We record the cash payment of $600,000, and we create this paid-in capital contingent share agreement with the value of $40,400. That $40,400 is essentially cast in stone. If the share price subsequently rises to $1,000 a share, that doesn't matter as far as this accounting is concerned. Likewise, if the share value falls to zero, that doesn't matter as far as this accounting is concerned. When we entered into this agreement on January 1st, 18, the value of the consideration that we gave up was obviously the cash of $600,000 plus these promised potential shares, which on the date that we made that promise, they were worth $40,400. Now, 3 years later, we find that the actual sales growth comes in at 5%. Looking at that table, 5% means we're going to issue 1,200 additional shares. And so we're going to go ahead and remove the paid-in capital contingent share agreement, replace it with 1,200 shares of common stock at the $1 par value. The remainder of that $40,400 is paid-in capital in excess of par.